Hey, Archie, I have a 401k from way back, and I want to roll that into a rollover IRA. What do I need to know?
Well, Rob, first let's start with the mistakes. I'm Archie Hoxton.
And I'm Rob Hoxton.
And this is Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. Welcome back to the Last Paycheck Podcast, brought to you by Hoxton Planning and Management. We're your hosts, CFP professionals Archie Hoxton and Rob Hoxton. And today we've got an interesting topic for you. We're going to talk about 401ks, specifically what to do when you leave your job or you retire and you had a 401k. And we're going to talk about all the ways that people make mistakes when they leave the job and figure out what to do with the 401k. There's a lot of pitfalls. And so it's really important to be armed with knowledge before you make a decision that could potentially cost a lot of money.
Archie, I'm always amazed when we have clients or prospective clients that come into the office and we start to talk to them about financial planning, and we do an assessment of what their resources are, the different buckets of money that they have. And they say that, oh yeah, I forgot, I have a 401k balance from my first job, which I had 30 years ago. And I'm like, what? I mean, if you got out of the car and left your wallet sitting on the seat, would you go back and get it?
Oh yeah.
Well, and I can tell you most 401ks have more in them than
it's a much more important asset than your wallet.
But it's alarming. I mean, you get busy on the new job, you forget about it. Sometimes if you change addresses, the old plan doesn't know your new address, and so you're not getting statements. It's a problem, though.
And it's such a problem that this is sort of a little bit of fun trivia. There is a website that you can go to that almost is like a 401k lost and found.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah. We'll link it in the description, but sometimes it's worth just going there and looking to see if maybe you've got a plan out there you forgot about, and they've been trying to find you and they haven't been able to. And then you finally connect with them, and instead of finding $20 in your winter coat, maybe you find $20,000 in an old retirement plan, something like that. So we'll link that in the description for you all to, in case that's relevant to you. But
well, let's talk about the options. So you've left your job and maybe you're going somewhere else, or maybe you're going home to, be with the kids or whatever it is that you're doing. Maybe you're retiring. Usually when people retire, they don't forget about it. But what are the options?
Well, option one is what we were just talking about. You can leave it there.
But don't forget about it.
Yeah, you don't want to forget about it. But you are technically allowed to let it sit in the old plan for your old employer. Sometimes plans have limitations on how long you can do that before they'll really get after you about it, but you can leave it. And so, there are drawbacks to that. And this is an option that I think is worse than people assume at face value, because on one hand, your whole financial life, every time that you do that, if you leave a job and leave the plan where it is, your financial life gets more disorganized, less unified, less consolidated. And you increase the likelihood that potentially very important asset gets neglected and forgotten about. And, you're not going in and looking at the investments, looking at the new options as they, bring in new investment options for you.
Looking at the beneficiaries, how many times have we seen where people forget about a 401k, which they had with their first spouse? They have a bitter divorce. Now they're married to somebody else and they die, and the first spouse gets the 401k.
Yeah.
You got to stay on top of these things. No doubt about it. You got to stay on top.
Yeah. And that's I think one of the big mistakes with leaving it where it is. It's not always going to be the wrong choice if you really liked that plan and the options and you don't feel like rolling it to, something else that can be a fine option, but it just means you've got to be a little bit more organized about it.
If your balance is fairly small, the plan sponsor, your former employer, has the right to take the money out of the plan and open a little IRA for you, a rollover IRA for you, and deposit the money in that. When they do that, understand that you're no longer invested. You are now sitting in cash, unless you go in and are aware of it and change the way that, and set up your investment elections. But it can automatically happen without you knowing it. And suddenly, instead of having an S&P 500 index fund that's growing with the stock market, now it's in something that's
a money market or stable value fund. It depends on what interest rates are, but they'd be paying almost nothing.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that later.
Yeah. So let's go to option 2. Option 2 is, I would argue, and this depends on your individual circumstances, I would argue this is the worst option because it's the most expensive option, and that's withdraw it. Just outright pull the money out of the 401k.
If you're not 59 and a half, that's going to cost you ordinary taxes plus 10%. That could be 30 to 40% of the balance just goes poof.
Yeah, right to taxes. Plus, depending on what you earn that year, that could push you into a higher tax bracket. If it's a really large amount in the 401k, it could push you to the highest tax bracket. If you've got $300,000 in a 401k and you withdraw it, are you ready to have an additional $300,000 of ordinary income on top of what you earn? And are you going to be okay with the bracket that puts you in plus penalty? That's a steep price to pay for the flexibility. And I see a lot of people on social media and YouTube who are like really anti 401k, and they're like, I pulled it out. It was the best thing I ever did. And I was like, well, gosh, are you really considering the future value of those taxes that you paid that you didn't have to pay? That was a tax at a much higher rate than you needed to pay.
Plus there was a 10% penalty.
Yeah.
Completely voluntary tax.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, wow, you've got to have a darn good reason for it.
I can just picture the IRS saying, we need some volunteers who would like to send us 10% of their account value.
Yeah. I mean, and the other thing is, it is also possible to do that without really understanding the consequences. So that's really important. I mean, a lot of this just comes from the fact that something that seems to be simple actually has a lot of complicated rules around it. And violating those rules can cost a lot of money. So it's so important to just educate yourself and be prepared with knowledge before you make a big decision with one of your most important assets.
Let's talk about the third option, which is to roll over your 401k balance into either a new employer's plan or into a rollover IRA.
Yeah. So those are two different options that are likely available to you. To rolling into a new employer plan is pretty straightforward. You're taking your the 401k from the place you're leaving. You're rolling the balance into the new 401k of your new employer. So you're now subject to the new investment lineup that employer has made available to you. You're subject to the fees that employer has embedded into the plan through whoever they're using for 401k provider. So there are some benefits. Again, the consolidation, the organization of it all, just having it all in one place, not having to go track everything down or forget about it. There's benefit to doing that, but you have restrictions that you're going to be subject to,
right?
According to the new plan.
Yeah, and whenever money moves from one plan to another or from one plan to an IRA, the former plan will liquidate those investments. They'll send either a wire, cash, or a check to the new plan or to a rollover IRA. It'll be deposited. And then unless the new plan has a default investment election, which is oftentimes like a target date mutual fund based on your age, you're going to have to pick the investment lineup. And if you forget to do that, once again, you may be sitting in cash for an extended period of time.
And that period of time could be a long time. This is especially problematic with rollovers to IRAs because 401ks are designed with simplicity in mind. So in one sense, having a narrow set of investment options can be beneficial. You don't have the entire universe of investments available to you that create a sense of analysis paralysis, right? You've got some really simple, straightforward, target date funds that are easy to pick without having a whole lot of investment expertise. Then there's usually something that's a little bit more custom. There's some options that are more specific to, a segment of the market, allows you to build something from scratch that's yours. But IRAs are not like that. IRAs, you have to choose out of basically everything: stocks, bonds, mutual funds, exchange traded funds. Annuities. Like, there's a whole world of options that you can look at. So it can create some analysis paralysis, which, between either that or just not knowing that it will be liquidated, people end up in some trouble. And that's demonstrated in some research that's been done.
Vanguard did some research in 2022 that they released in 2022. And they said, and in the research, and I quote, Americans with cash-heavy IRAs give up more than $172 billion a year in retirement wealth they could have generated by investing in stocks and bonds instead of just remaining in cash. And it's an amazingly high percentage of rollover IRA holders that are subject to this. And the ones that are most subject to it, that it happens most often, are younger ones.
Yeah.
Younger employees or younger taxpayers tend to be more at risk. The data would suggest that they're more likely to have this sort of untended pile of cash sitting in an IRA, missing out on opportunities. And they're the ones that most need to be invested because they have this long runway.
It's the greatest opportunity cost when you're younger like that. Of course, often it feels so far away that you don't have this pressing need. Like, I have got to get this figured out because I'm retiring in 5 years or 10 years. Maybe it's 20, 25 years away or more. So you don't have the same sense of urgency that can potentially lead you to not take it as seriously or not prioritize it or get into analysis paralysis.
Yeah. And IRAs, incidentally, there's so much more money in IRAs than there are in 401ks. The same study, this is just kind of nerdy stuff, $14.3 trillion in U.S. individual retirement accounts, IRAs, as opposed to $11 trillion in 401k plans. Anyway, you look at it, it's a lot of money, but a substantial percentage of that $14 trillion in IRAs sitting in cash.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's another really big mistake. Because like we said, when you leave the 401k and you choose to roll it over to an IRA or to the new plan, they will liquidate, and then you'll have cash. And so you have to do something about it.
Let's talk about some other pitfalls in that rollover process. If you're going to roll over your 401k to a rollover IRA, you're going to have some benefits. You're going to have a broader array, most likely, of investment options.
Yeah.
You may have higher or lower investment expenses. It depends on the plan and the IRA that you're looking at. Something to be mindful of. There are also a couple of ways where you can inadvertently step on a tax mine.
Yeah, there are.
Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, and I think first we want to maybe do some defining. So there are specific industry terms, 3 terms that are important to know: trustee to trustee transfer, direct rollover, and indirect rollover. Trustee to trustee transfer applies to IRAs. Direct and indirect rollovers apply to this movement of 401k to IRA. And so in this, a direct rollover is where the 401k sends the money to the IRA custodian, the company where the IRA is held, and you never take possession of it. However, it's confusing because they often send you the check, but it's not made out to you. It's made out to the custodian or the institution where the IRA is held. So you can't cash the check.
Right.
It's not made out to you anyway. It's made out to them. So what you do is you forward it to the company. They cash it. Boom, simple. It's a clean and simple way to do the transfer without a whole lot of, big pitfalls.
No tax grenades in that.
Yeah. The other one, which I just recommend avoiding, if at all possible, whenever you can, is the indirect rollover. And this is where you actually do take possession of the funds. So they write you a check, you put it in your bank account, then you move the funds to the IRA.
But the catch is that your former employer has to withhold 20% of that check, send it to the IRS.
Yeah.
So when you have 60 days to deposit the money back into your rollover IRA, so if you have a $10,000 rollover and your employer withholds $2,000 of it to send to the IRS, now you have $8,000 in your hand. When you put that money into the rollover IRA, you can't put the $8,000 in. You got to put $10,000 in order to avoid taxes and penalties. Now, can you think of a scenario where you might want to do this? Because I think this just seems like an awful idea.
Yeah, it is, because you have to, and if it's just $2,000, maybe that's a simpler issue. But if it's $20,000, you've got to find that $20,000 in cash to put, because it's the original $20,000 is with the IRS. So you've got to put that back into the IRA. So you have to, so that creates a huge problem. But there are some reasons why someone might do this. And the main one that I've seen is essentially someone's doing a real estate transaction. They need money for closing. And so they pull money out of their IRA through an indirect, or their 401k through an indirect rollover. And then they replenish it within 60 days with the proceeds of the transaction. It's a risky transaction, because if something goes wrong and you get past the 60-day window, the entire thing is taxable.
And
penalized potentially.
So before we run out of time, something that everybody needs to know is that you can only do one indirect rollover in any 12-month period. If you do one indirect rollover and put the money in two different IRAs, counts as two indirect rollovers, the entire sum is subject to taxes and penalties.
Yeah. So, moral of the story, you've got options. Keep them simple. Know where the landmines are. And if you're going to go with a route that has more of these little landmines, be really, really careful and get some professional guidance along the way. That's all for today. So if you enjoyed the episode, leave us a comment, subscribe, sign up for notifications, share it with your family and friends. And we really hope to see you next time. You've been watching Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. If you like this show, be sure to hit like and subscribe. Last Paycheck is available anywhere you get your podcasts.